my adult life, at least the part of it that added up to something. I have an odd question. Considering that we have a relatively intimate group here, I want to give the audience a choice. We can go through my presentation. I'm happy to do that. I think that there's some reasonable content, although some of the content will be repeats of what you've seen so far in the last day and a half. Or we could turn this into a session where I'm literally fireside chatting with the entire room about 5G and how it might impact what you do in your business in this field that we're calling the edge. Anyone want to vote about going through the presentation? Well, that's pretty damning on my presentation work. All right. Fireside chat. Okay, the light's blinding me, but I think we got hands in favor of the fireside chat. So, I want to start by talking a little bit about why I give a crap about 5G and why I think working at Ericsson is actually extremely interesting right now for someone in my space and with my experience. For those of you who haven't heard of Jevons paradox, I use it a lot. Some would probably argue I overuse it, but take 5 minutes and go to Wikipedia when you have a chance and read up on Jevons paradox, Jevons. Why is that important? Well, Jevons was a scientist in the 1850s and in London, and he did a study, he was an economic scientist, and he did a study on coal. And while I don't remember the exact numbers, effectively something happened in the coal business at the time that allowed for coal to be delivered much more efficiently and therefore much more cheaply. His assumption as an economist was that this would hurt the coal industry but help everyone that used coal, right? In effect, not the opposite happened, but both sides were benefited. Both sides were benefited because Mark Thiele, as the horseshoe hammerer in his little shop with the fire pit burning coal all day long, only could support, based on the cost of coal, I could only support hammering horseshoes between about 7:30 a.m. and 2:30 in the afternoon. Because I couldn't get enough traffic into my shop of new horseshoes to hammer and afford to pay for the coal I was burning for any other hours before or after that. Now the cost of coal has come down by 50%, so even if my traffic is halved before 7:30 and after 2:30 in the afternoon, I could still justify keeping my shop open and working on more horseshoes because my cost of doing business had reduced. At almost any stage of the technology curve, from mainframes to today, we could pick part of that cycle and I could demonstrate Jevons paradox to you. From mainframes to minis. Mainframes were doing everything we needed, right? But minis were smaller and they were cheaper. Well, instead of having one mini replace a mainframe in each of the giant companies that could afford to have a mainframe, almost every company had a mini if they were more than 100 people. When we went from minis to towers, we went from every company of reasonable size having one to every company of even smaller size having dozens or more. And then we went from towers to blades and blades to VMs. You get the idea. If we use the IBM commercial from about 10 years ago of taking your data center from 100 racks down to one, and we use that analogy for VMs, I could quickly show that in fact, from 2006, when VMs really started to take off, to today, we have more like 5 times as many servers in production on the planet now than we did in 2006, just 12 years later. So what happened to that multiplication factor of being able to do so much more with so much less, meaning we didn't need to buy a bunch of other stuff? Well, me, as an enterprising IT person, I look at VMware and I go, well, before I could buy one server for $25,000 or $5,000. Now I can have 10 servers, but I can do all these other jobs. I can do more testing. I can do more redundancy. I can do the DR that I could never afford to do before. I could do these small apps that people are asking for because now I can actually afford it, and so on and so on and so on. So why am I saying all this? Well, I think the edge is really waiting for its Jevons paradox moment, right? So when you think about 5G and the edge, 5G is, depending on how it's deployed and how it's supported once it's deployed, by some of the folks in this room, by people who build data centers, by people who build local loop networks, and by people who augment backhaul and everything in between. How that's deployed will be a big difference between whether or not we have fits and starts for the next 5-7 years as we try to build out the edge, or we allow the edge to blossom and really explode as people find new ways to use the technology. So this is where Jevons paradox really comes in. We lower that cost, we make 5G available to more people, people have more bandwidth than they had before. What do they do with it? Right? Well, when you had a 2G phone or a 3G phone, how many videos were you watching on an average day? None. So when people were using 2G phones, were they thinking we need 4G because we're going to watch videos from YouTube? No, they weren't thinking that. Were they thinking they would have more interactive applications on their phone? No, they weren't thinking that. But when that bandwidth became available, the garden started to bloom. 5G will do that at the edge. In no uncertain terms, it will do that at the edge. People will find ways to use it. There will be an explosion of IoT. One of the slides, a couple of the slides that I would have shown you, demonstrate the difference. In fact, I'll just go to them so you can look at the numbers and get a better idea. These are just rough ideas, but nonetheless. By the way, just in case I forget to mention it later, almost all of the themes we're working on today, almost all of them, are driven behind digital transformation, and digital transformation's most important opportunity is customer intimacy and customer experience improvement. So no matter what you work on, no matter what you think about, keep that in mind. And the edge is no difference. Remember mobile, video, 4G, LTE, or video before, we just talked about that. A time when my connected car saved my life, we don't remember that because it hasn't happened yet. The time that you could use Facebook and Instagram effectively when you're at a ball game, I don't remember that either, even today. Well, imagine that stadium when every person is connected by 3 or 4 devices and the stadium has 1 million IoT devices in it. 1 million. Okay, let's be conservative, only 500,000. And okay, yeah, they're all only dropping a tiny bit of data every few seconds. But nonetheless, imagine the impact. We don't have any choice if we want to be able to support that kind of activity, but to have 5G. So if we haven't done that activity already, 5G will enable those opportunities. Some people have talked about the experience of being at a football game and the football team wanting to be able to have the videos on both sides of the field show plays close enough to when the play actually occurred so that the audience doesn't know the difference, right? And that doesn't seem like a big deal, but that's enough latency to make a difference. 5G might be able to enable that. 4G and LTE will not. Gartner suggests that one smart home could have as many as 500 devices in just a few years. So imagine, take a look at that. I don't have to read it to you, but take a look at that. Imagine Austin having more devices connected to the internet, probably supplying almost the same amount of data to the internet as all of the cell phones in North America just 10 or 12 years ago. And that's just one city. Well, you guys have all seen some data about growth of data. No exception there. 5G will only accelerate that, but 5G isn't accelerating it as much as 5G enables other solutions to accelerate the growth of data. Video as a demand driver. People never even talk about this. I found this out by accident. You know, you don't know a subject and somebody asks you to speak about it and you learn about it and then you tell everybody you know about it. And that's one of the things I learned when I was doing this work on this presentation. That video as a part of building IoT is becoming a craze. IoT in smart cities. You guys have seen information about 5G, but all of this stuff, I mean, just the improvements in bandwidth and throughput. Look at where smartphones are going to start coming out with 5G. There's already several companies that have made announcements to that effect. Tablets and a fixed wireless access, continuing, massive IoT and industrial IoT, smartphones and tablets, etc. I mean, it's just the growth is not that far away. And these are just some working examples. So let's stop on this opportunity page. I want to give you guys a chance to ask me some questions, depending on what you do. Ask me a question. You work in data centers, ask me what that means to you. You work with running an IT shop, ask me what that means to you. You have a business that might need the edge or might benefit from the edge, ask me. Questions? Don't all come at once. Anyone? All right.
In terms of the broad range of use case families here, what do you see pushing the envelope in the next 2 years to get critical mass in terms of economic value or safety or return to these early use cases?
Right, you're asking the right question. I mean, everyone should be asking that question, and it's a question that we within Ericsson and with all of our partners are asking all the time. And my basic answer, it may not be the right one, but my basic answer to that is that there is no shortage of ingenuity in being able to create value from edge if edge was there, right? But how does edge develop? Right? There are a lot of risks in how the market might develop. As a tech geek who used to build a lot of infrastructure for companies, one of the things that pissed me off as a purist was the fact that VMs came out from VMware, and then shortly after that they came out from KVM and Zen and from Microsoft, and what the hell? They're all VMs. I could package application environments in those VMs, but they weren't the same. I couldn't share between them, etc. Imagine now that I'm a developer and I want to deploy code for some small app that I'm just going to get pennies from the average user of that app for globally, but I'm going to spend millions of dollars developing that app, and I can only deploy it on AT&T in North America, right? And the reason I can only deploy it on AT&T in North America is because AT&T is the one that works with AWS, and AWS has the APIs and the code that I understand, and I can't afford to design for Alibaba and Tencent and AWS and Azure and Google to roll out my app. I need to be able to roll out my app in a uniform way. So that and many other potential obstacles are what, in my mind, create the most amount of risk in really creating the edge that I think that will bring the most value, because I don't think that our edge opportunity will be coined by 2 or 3 major apps that create enough value for investment globally. And value for investment globally, think about trying to replicate AWS or Google globally. Just, overnight, you just decide you want to compete with them globally. It's $20 billion just to get into the game. So imagine trying to do that at the edge and say, I hope they come, right? Nobody can do that. So what do we do to lower the barrier to entry? To me, it's all about, from an industry standpoint, how do we work together to lower the barrier to entry so that when I want to deploy an app, I can use the most efficient and effective deployment tools that I'm comfortable with, and I can deploy to the most possible customers. That way, whether my app gets me $100 every time Jim uses it or 5 cents every time Jim uses it, I can still afford to deploy it, right? So that to me is both the biggest opportunity and the biggest risk in how the market's likely to develop, is that we develop a market that's fractured and gets developed piecemeal, comes up with different standards, and it takes 5 or 6 years longer to develop, and in fact, by the time it begins to reach any kind of real maturity, some other technology has come in to burn it all down and make us start over again. Yes, sir?
So in 5G, they talk about, software, right? It's a big deal because going from 3G to 4G was a lot of hardware uplift, but going from 4G to 5G, talk about more software being involved, that's number one. They also talk about millimeter wave, that's going to create more problems for 5G deployment because it's going to be more fragmented and distributed. Can you comment about the rollout of 5G? Because it's probably going to take a little longer based on all these new themes.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is one of the areas where I can't go into nearly as much detail as I would like, because as I said, I only play a telecom guy on TV. But what I do know about 5G and its rollout is that, as compared to the fake trees that you see for LTE rollout around the city, 5G is going to be much more pervasive because of what you described, right? There's going to have to be a lot more of them. And what does that mean, both for deployment and for cost of deployment and for accessibility? What does it mean in certain terrain environments, like in the middle of big cities, et cetera? How long will it take to get access? All of those things are critical. Beyond that, some of the software that I'm most excited about are things that really benefit the operators, and by benefiting the operators, allow them to create more business opportunities with their extended customers and with the enterprises. Things like being able to do network slicing and stuff like that. But beyond saying it's going to be much more pervasive from a one on every corner type of thing, I don't have much more to add to that, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, it really is the chicken and egg story with 5G. But what I can tell you is, and you don't have to take my word for it, we can take a look at what Verizon and AT&T have both been doing, and the experience they've had is that the enthusiasm for what they've rolled out already is so high that they're attempting to accelerate other rollouts as a result. Anyone else? Again, data centers, network impact, potential customer demand. All right, I'll just go to a couple more slides then. Bore you that way. So data centers, the funnel, right? Imagine you're putting devices, many of them, at the edge of the network that have a 10 to 100x improvement in throughput and performance over what exists today. And imagine what that does to connectivity at cell towers, connectivity back and forth to local data centers, et cetera. That's, I don't think we've taken that into account well enough yet. As a longtime IT guy, again, who thinks about operations, I think about ownership. And my biggest concern is, how are we going to own this if we try to put it in? How are we going to own the infrastructure that has to get built? How are we going to own the cloud environments that are going to get built alongside it in order to further leverage it at the edge? And how much will 5G actually define the need to do more things at the edge, because we can't possibly justify all that extra bandwidth utilization back to the core? That's a real problem. Massive new bandwidth. So I mean, we could talk about all these things. All of these are opportunity spaces and risks. Security, I think, it's been mentioned a few times. I would agree that security is a huge risk. Security from a lot of different categories. Security from much more distributed compute that people might be able to get access to how IoT is used. One of my biggest pet peeves about IoT isn't that somebody would actually get access to a device and get access to my network, but they would get access to a set of my devices that provide in group a picture of some work, like a factory work or a mill that's doing something, or even how your house is operating, and actually sending me a different message than what's real from the IoT devices, causing me to take actions that might cause me or the occupants or my manufacturing harm, right? Creating shared value. I mean, this is one, it's a stupid slide maybe, but it's my thought on the idea that Ericsson is not going to solve this problem alone. AWS is not going to solve this problem alone. Google is not going to solve this problem alone. This is a partner opportunity. And the best way for us to accelerate access to a much larger market is to work as a group to address the market. What's missing for most companies today? No one can go out and just say, I'd like to buy some edge, please. You can't, right? And the only way you can do that today for most companies is you get some geek who runs infrastructure for the company and say, and you say, I got to go build infrastructure at every one of my store locations. That's edge for most companies today. Who to solve for? I'm going to takeaways, since I have to wrap up. So these are my takeaways. The edge is more than device improvement. We talked about that. It takes partners. Enabling a solution could be relatively simple, or it could be like trying to build a small Google by yourself. Depends on what type of edge problem you're trying to solve for. Customer intimacy. Again, I'm repeating this, and I would repeat it more times if I had more time. Customer intimacy is the driver for everything that we're doing relative to digital transformation. And the edge is a feeder to helping you expand on your digital transformation efforts. There are still hurdles. We talked about that: security, data management. Data management, I mean, that's going to be a huge one. Potentially being able to do multi-tenant data use and brokerage and many new business opportunities as much as there is risk. It's about people and culture. This kind of transformation and being able to leverage the edge is going to make you rethink everything you thought you knew about how your business interacts with their customers. Everything you thought you knew, every assumption you thought you had about what you needed to own from a technology and a service standpoint, you need to review. Put it on the table. This is opportunity for everyone. Thank you very much. I appreciate your patience with my unique presentation style today. Any last questions? Maybe one question? All right. Thank you.